Welcome back to Students for Political Engagement. Today we have Sharon Chisholm. So, thank you for coming tonight. Would you like to offer a self-introduction of yourself and perhaps why you're running for City Council?
I would be thrilled. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sharon Chisholm, as you mentioned. I'm a 20-year resident of Richmond Hill. I have a master's degree in disaster and emergency management, undergraduate degree in history, which I absolutely, if I had a choice, I would be hard pressed to choose between history and emergency management. Let's see, what else? I'm running for office because, as I kind of put out a while ago, Richmond Hill's my home, and it's really time for renovations. Richmond Hill's got some great bones. You could see that just about anywhere, but the shingles are starting to look a little sad. The windows might need to be replaced, and we've got some work to do. How we've fallen behind, I don't know, and I don't want to point fingers, but it's one of these things where we're at a kind of crossroad, and we really need to kind of buckle down and put Richmond Hill on the map.
Thank you for that answer. And this leads us to our first question. What are one of the more important aspects of a good city is efficient transportation. What, as a councillor, would you do to develop and improve Richmond Hill's current transportation system?
Transportation in and of itself is essentially a regional issue. But having said that, I think there's a lot of ways we can look at kind of building our intra-transportation. One of the things I've heard fairly often is the difficulty people have in walking when people are zooming by on e-bikes. And I think e-bikes are a really great idea, but we've got to find a way of incorporating them into city streetscapes so that pedestrians don't feel at risk and e-bike users aren't at risk for having to dodge into traffic, that kind of stuff. One of the other things that I'm really kind of keen about isn't so much the fact that the subway is coming. It's going to be late. It's supposed to come after 2027, which is when the Ontario line is supposed to be finished. The word from the province is soon after that. So, it's like, okay, fine. But my concern is the fact that the focus is southbound. Everything is going southbound towards Toronto. There doesn't really seem to be focused northbound into the heart of Richmond Hill itself, into the northern parts of Richmond Hill. I mean, if we're going to exist as a city, then people need to kind of be turned around and, pointed in the right direction, which is northbound. Okay.
All right, thank you for that answer. And I think as a follow-up to that, I think another part of the governance of traffic that is under the purview of the city is like traffic bylaws and signages and things of that sort. So do you have any ideas on how those might be developed across Richmond Hill?
Well, it speaks to where people are and how they want to get to, where it is they want to go. Bylaws definitely need to be put into place. I mean, the last thing you want is kind of a free-for-all on a sidewalk. No offense to anybody who has an e-bike, but people can get really cranky and really nasty if they think they have the right of way and somebody else doesn't. Last thing you want to have is somebody kind of pushed out of the way. You don't want to have a kid run down, that kind of thing. And it's important for the city to be able to say, okay, this is how we're going to manage our traffic. This is going to how we're going to manage our pedestrian safety. And again, it's really important for community input, because what's good for an area that might have nothing but condo towers isn't going to be the same as an area that's largely single family homes.
All right, thank you for that. And our next question is on something that you previously mentioned, which is finances. So the financial health of the city is a very important part of its operation. So what would you do as a councillor to ensure that Richmond Hill is on good financial standing while at the same time providing the same or improved services?
Finance budgets are right in my wheelhouse. I've done this for years. I'm one of these strange people that think budgets are fun. They're fun. I mean, it's fun with numbers. Having said that, budgets do represent impacts all the way along. I've been in situations where not only have I had to work with zero-based budgets, I've also ended up or had to work with situations where we've been mandated with budget cuts. So when you're dealing with essentially an organization that has to maintain salaries, has to maintain services, and has to do it on less money, you definitely have to kind of bring your A game when it comes to looking for efficiencies. This also is where, you know, kind of my background in emergency management comes in, because part of a significant aspect of emergency management is planning, not just for tomorrow or the day after, but also planning for things that you don't think you might need or you don't think might happen. So with the city, it's really, really important that we look at efficiencies, make sure that our reserve funds are more than adequate to meet, you know, whatever, you know, comes down the pike at us.
All right, thank you. And I think as another follow-up to that, on the budgetary side, do you think there are any items that you think could have more funding devoted to them, or any items that could have slightly less funding devoted to them?
That's a really hard call. Everyone's going to have, you know, want to have an oar in the water. For me, for example, I would like to see a little bit more devoted towards personal responsibility, you know, again, disaster management, emergency management, you know, things like having 72-hour bug out bags, you know, having some kind of incentive so that, you know, God forbid, knock on wood, Richmond Hill ends up faced with a tornado, or we end up with a tail end of a really bad tropical storm. Our citizens know and are equipped to, you know, essentially weather that situation. They've got the 72-hour bag, their families are looked after. They know that they don't have to, you know, be running down the road looking for an open grocery store, looking for an open gas station because their car is filled up, the propane tank is filled, you know, they got food in the basement, they got a case of water.
All right, thank you for your answer. So next question has to do with our public parks and green spaces. So how will you work to protect and improve the environment of Richmond Hill?
Again, one of the platforms or planks of my platform is to develop or help develop what I like to call a destination park space. In particular, what I was looking at is, or thinking about, is an outdoor pool, which, you know, with useful designs and whatnot, could be multifunctional. That would be incorporated with either the Dunlop Observatory lands or other park lands that we've got some space. But one of the things I would like to see is a little bit better care taken of the river tributaries that we've got. You know, it's one of these things where all our parks can be interconnected. They should be walkable. And, you know, it's one of these things that makes Richmond Hill that much more attractive, A, and B, also kind of contributes to the fact that we are on the moraine. We are responsible for it. Having junk thrown in little branches all the time really doesn't serve us well.
Thank you. And our next question has to do with community safety. So an important part of a livable community is community safety itself. How will you, as a councillor, maintain and improve community safety in Richmond Hill?
Community safety is a really, really big issue. I would almost think it's a hot button issue right now. One of the things that we need to do is look at what kind of relationship City Council has with the local police. One of the things that might be an idea is to see whether or not we could have micro stations set up. I know there's with the kind of impending growth in around Highway 7, Young Street, that kind of thing, and all the mega condos going in, you're going to want to make sure that people feel safe in their homes. And if it means that you're going to have a little substation with a couple of cops on bikes, hey, that works for me. I think one of the things that upsets a lot of people is that there really doesn't seem to be police visibility, even though if you look at the stats, Richmond Hill doesn't seem to be as unsafe as, an awful lot of other areas. If people think they're unsafe, then they're going to feel unsafe, and that's going to essentially affect how they kind of act in public, how they respond to, a neighbor's, knock on the door because they're, in distress. The other thing that I've also seen an awful lot of is kind of serious issues regarding car thefts. And it's one of these things where part of it needs to be addressed in terms of people getting Faraday bags, Faraday cases and boxes, to kind of protect their cars and whatnot. But the other thing is to kind of have a really serious look at, where these thefts are happening and who is affecting the thefts. I mean, are they part of a ring? Are they just, bored people with, tech skills that, want to upset the neighbors? You really have to kind of get a handle on it. And that's something that we really need the police to do for us.
All right, thank you. And moving on to our next question, which is about urban development. So urban development is obviously a very important part of City Council's responsibility. And right now, the lack of housing is an important problem that's facing Richmond Hill as our population continues to grow. And on the other hand, the population density and adequate services are important concerns of many residents. So what is your philosophy of how City Council should approach urban development and housing?
It's urban development. Well, essentially, let me back up a minute. We've kind of been stuck with the MZOs. So there isn't a lot of wiggle room as far as that is concerned. Where we do have, I think, a little bit of wiggle room is in the kind of services and the, kind of overall design that these particular, condominium units are going to have. The last thing we want is to end up with such an intensification that we are, let's say, slightly better off than, like some of the areas in Mumbai. I mean, if you guys have ever seen Slumdog Millionaire, I mean, that's the kind of density that we could be faced if things are simply done hodgepodge without, any consideration. But we do have to make allowances for, growth in the city, for newcomers, and we have to start thinking outside of the box as far as what works in a neighborhood, what doesn't work in a neighborhood.
All right, and as a sort of follow-up to that, as yourself, do you think that in your idea of how urban development and housing should work, do you think that you have a preference for like medium density housing or condos or single detached homes or anything of that matter in like how Richmond Hill should be developed?
Development, that's an interesting question. And I think it speaks to needing an overarching plan for the city. I don't know about you, but I have yet to see anything that shows me, and whether on screen or hard fashion, what exactly Richmond Hill is supposed to look like 50 years from now. Is it supposed to be, like a gazillion condos all the way up Young Street and across Highway 7 with some little bits and pieces kind of off to the edges? Is it supposed to be kind of European styles where you've got kind of density islands and surrounded by, medium density and, individual homes? And it's a matter of really wanting to see or have an idea as to what the vision is for the city of Richmond Hill. And that will include, and that must include, input from like all 6 wards. There's no way that any one particular ward should have to carry the burden of intensification, 1. 2, there's also no way Richmond Hill as a city should carry the intensification burden for York Region. And that's my biggest concern, with both Vaughan and Markham having been able to kind of put a stake in the ground and, put out plans that suit them. It puts Richmond Hill in the position of being stuck with leftovers. It's like, oh, too bad. You didn't get here fast enough, so you get stuck with the uglies.
All right, thank you for that. And our last question is, what would, as the counselor for Ward 6, what would you do the first thing you came on city council?
A couple things. One is definitely get a handle on what the budget looks like, what the plans were. If we can keep budgets to 0, that's great. If we have to have a modest increase, then we have to have a modest increase. It's the numbers that will tell us what needs to be done. It's the requirement for services that will tell us what will need to be done. And that will essentially guide everything else moving forward. The kind of low-key non-monetary thing, well, it's not so much non-monetary, but it does have a cost because we did hire a consultant for it, is to check in on the land acknowledgement that council had approved and that has been assigned to a consultant for work. Now, the consultancy that's been hired is Indigenous owned, or at least led by Indigenous persons. So it acknowledges the fact that the city of Richmond Hill doesn't have the necessary staff to do this. And no one says it does. The important thing is to essentially have this land acknowledgement kind of readied up and, have it say something that is meaningful for us and for the city and for our Indigenous neighbors and forebears.
All right, thank you very much. And I think that concludes our interview. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good evening.
You too.